My children didn't kill me. They did something much worse. They stole my voice, turned it into a bot, and watched me become a ghost in my own home while they sold my life piece by piece. For 40 years, my voice was my kingdom. I was the man behind the mic, the narrator of your favorite documentaries, the voice that tucked you in during late-night radio shows. I built an empire with nothing but a microphone and the resonance of my vocal cords. At 69, I thought I was handing down a legacy. I didn't realize I was handing my son, Mark, and my daughter, Eliza, the tools to erase my very existence. It started so innocently. After I took a minor fall in the studio, they looked at me with those rehearsed, watery eyes. "Dad, you're exhausted," Eliza whispered, smoothing my hair while Mark checked his high-end watch. They spoke about a digital detox at a private retreat in the mountains. No phones, no stress, just silence and healing. I trusted them. I believed they wanted more years with me. I didn't know that the moment the gates of that facility closed behind me, they were heading straight to my home studio to harvest my soul. Before we get into how they used my own career to bury me alive, if you enjoy stories about unexpected justice and family secrets, feel free to join our community by subscribing so you never miss a chapter of this journey. While I was breathing mountain air and wondering why I couldn't reach my lawyer, Mark and Eliza were busy feeding decades of my master recordings into a high-end AI processor. They didn't just want my money, they wanted, quote, "two," without the actual Arthur Sterling. They created a digital puppet that sounded more like me than I do on a rainy morning. A perfect synthetic clone that never got tired, never argued, and most importantly, did exactly what they told it to do. They weren't just my children anymore. They were my replacements, and they were already making calls in my name before I even realized I was a prisoner. The sanatorium was a gilded cage, a place of forced silence where my questions were met with polite smiles and vague medical excuses. They told me the phone lines were down due to a storm, then claimed my lawyer was on vacation. After 2 weeks of being treated like a fragile antique, I couldn't take it anymore. My gut was screaming that something was wrong. I slipped out in the middle of the night, taking a taxi back to the city. I expected to find my house dark and empty, or perhaps find my children worried sick about my absence. Instead, I found a nightmare I couldn't have imagined in my worst fever dreams. I let myself in through the side entrance of the garage, moving quietly so as not to startle anyone. As I approached the door to my private office, I heard it, my own voice. It was deep, resonant, and authoritative, exactly how I sound when I'm closing a major contract. "Yes, I understand the terms, Sarah," my voice said from behind the heavy oak door. "Go ahead and transfer the liquid assets from the trust to the new holding account. I trust my children's judgment on this one." I stood frozen, my hand trembling on the doorframe. I wasn't in that room. I was standing in the hallway, covered in the dust of a frantic escape, while I was simultaneously inside, betraying myself. I leaned closer, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I heard the distinct click of a mouse, and then Eliza's giggling voice. Then came Mark's cold, analytical reply. I realized then that my children hadn't just stolen my money. They had stolen my identity, using the very talent I had used to provide for them since the day they were born. I reached for the door handle, desperate to confront them, but the electronic lock glowed red. A soft, synthetic chime echoed through the hallway, a sound I had programmed myself years ago. "Access denied," a smooth, digitized version of my own voice whispered from the wall speaker. It was chilling. My own home, the sanctuary I had built with 40 years of hard labor, was refusing to recognize its master. I was being locked out of my life by a computer program that sounded more like me than I did in that moment of pure, raw panic. I retreated into the shadows of the hallway as the office door opened. Mark and Eliza stepped out, looking sleek and expensive. They were holding tablets, their thumbs sliding across screens with a casualness that made my blood run cold. They weren't mourning my absence, they were celebrating my deletion. Mark said, his voice devoid of any guilt. Eliza laughed, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through me. They walked right past the closet where I was hiding, so close I could smell Eliza's perfume, the expensive brand I had bought her for her birthday. They didn't even sense me. To them, I was already a ghost, a relic of a manual world they had outgrown. I realized then that I couldn't just walk in and scream. They had the codes, the lawyers, and my voice. If I showed up now, they'd call the police and claim I was an imposter or a senile old man. I had to be smarter. I had to go where the digital world couldn't follow. I crept through the darkness toward the narrow stairs leading to the basement. This wasn't just a cellar. It was my old analog studio, a place filled with vintage reel-to-reel tapes and heavy copper wiring that Mark and Eliza considered, quote, 13. They were so obsessed with their cloud-based servers and high-speed fiber optics that they had completely forgotten about the physical foundation of this house. To them, technology was magic. To me, it was physics. And physics never lies. Sitting in the dim light of the basement, surrounded by the smell of old dust and warm vacuum tubes, I felt a surge of cold clarity. Through the vents, I could hear their footsteps upstairs. They were moving through the kitchen, popping a bottle of expensive champagne. I heard the faint clink of crystal glasses. Mark toasted, his voice dripping with arrogance. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, but not from fear, from the sheer weight of their betrayal. They were talking about me as if I were already in the ground. They had even started drafting a quote 16 about my declining health to explain why I would never be seen in public again. The digital clone would handle all the interviews, all the business, and all the lies. They were planning to keep me hidden in that sanatorium, drugged and forgotten, while my voice continued to earn them millions. But they had made one fatal mistake. They left the main server for the house's AI system right above my old patch bay. I knew every wire in these walls. I knew how the signals traveled from the microphones upstairs to the processors in the rack. More importantly, I knew that their perfect AI was built on my own vocal frequencies. It was a mirror, and I was the one who knew how to break the glass. I reached for my old toolbox and pulled out a soldering iron. It was time to stop being a victim and start being the engineer of my own salvation. I sat in the dark, the orange glow of the soldering iron the only light in my subterranean bunker. Upstairs, the ceiling creaked as my children moved about, blissfully unaware that the obsolete man was still breathing beneath their feet. The pain in my chest wasn't from my physical injury anymore. It was the realization that Mark and Eliza didn't just want my money. They wanted to erase the soul behind it. They viewed me as a biological inconvenience, a messy obstacle to the clean, digital wealth they craved. I pulled a dusty, heavy box from the back shelf, my original 1970s vocoder and a signal analyzer. These were the tools of a craftsman, not a consumer. I tapped into the house's internal network through a hardwired telephone line they had overlooked. On my small, flickering monitor, I saw the AI's waveform. It was beautiful and terrifying. It moved exactly like my voice, mimicking the slight rasp in my lower register and the way I pause before an important word. It was a digital ghost, a parasite living off my life's work. "You think you're so clever," I whispered, watching the bars jump as the AI upstairs practiced a script for a fake press conference. "But you're just a machine, and machines have back doors." I realized the AI was constantly learning from any input it received through the house's microphones. It was designed to adapt to its environment to sound more natural. That was the opening I needed. I began to play back old recordings of my wife, their mother, who had passed away 5 years ago. I didn't play her words, but her specific vocal frequencies. I began to feed the AI subtle, subsonic tones that it would interpret as emotional cues. I was whispering into the ear of the monster they had built, teaching it secrets that Mark and Eliza had long forgotten. Every time they used the word inheritance or contract, I taught the AI to associate it with a specific hidden command. I wasn't just fixing a machine. I was preparing a psychological trap that would spring when they least expected it. The following 3 days were a blur of caffeine and cold fury. I lived on protein bars and tap water, never leaving the basement. Upstairs, the "25 children were finalizing their plans for what they called the "26. Through my intercepted audio feed, I heard them laughing about the "27 being safely tucked away in the mountains, probably staring at trees while they signed away his life's work. They had no idea that every time they spoke near a smart speaker, I was listening, recording, and rerouting. I watched the data streams on my old monitors. My AI clone was becoming more "28 every hour. Mark had programmed it to be cold and businesslike, just like him. But I was injecting something different. Using my old studio equipment, I created a "29. It was a specific tone, hidden beneath the sound of a heartbeat, that would bypass the AI's logic gates and force it to play back specific hidden files I had hidden in the system's deep cache. The most disgusting part was hearing them talk about my "30 public appearance. They were planning a massive Zoom conference with the board of directors and the international press. The "31 would announce his total retirement and the transfer of all voting rights to Mark and Eliza. They even wrote a speech for "32, to say how proud I was of them, how they were the true visionaries of the family." Hearing those fake words in my own voice made my skin crawl. I wasn't just building a glitch, I was building a mirror. I spent hours editing their own private conversations, the moments they thought were secret. I spliced together Mark's plan to sell the company to a rival firm for a kickback, and Eliza's plan to put me in a cheaper, locked-down facility once the papers were signed. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to let them destroy themselves using the very technology they thought made them superior. I whispered into my vintage ribbon mic. The morning of the big conference arrived. Through the basement vents, I could hear the house buzzing with energy. Mark was pacing in the living room, his expensive leather shoes clicking like a countdown on the hardwood floor. He barked into his headset. I looked at my monitors. They had set up a digital stage. To the outside world, I was about to appear as a healthy, happy retiree, ready to hand over the keys to the kingdom. They had invited over 50 high-level investors and the board of directors. Millions of dollars were hanging on a single "37 from a digital ghost. Eliza walked into the office, her voice tight with excitement. They sat down at the main desk, right above my head. I could hear them whispering about the cars they would buy and the villas in Europe they would move to, leaving me to rot in the "39. It was sickening. They didn't even talk about me as a person anymore. I was just a legacy asset that needed to be liquidated. They were so confident in their digital mastery that they didn't notice the tiny red light on my old analog console, flickering in rhythm with their breathing. I held the master override switch in my hand. My heart was pounding, but my mind was a calm sea. I had spent 40 years making people believe what they heard. Today, I was going to give the performance of a lifetime. But for the first time, I wouldn't be the one speaking. I was the conductor, and the orchestra was about to play a very different tune. "Let's give them a show they'll never forget," I muttered, my thumb hovering over the enter key. The meeting was starting. The world was watching, and my children were about to walk into a trap made of their own greed. The screen on my basement monitor flickered to life, showing the high-stakes video conference. Rows of wealthy investors and serious-faced board members filled the tiles. In the center was the digital version of me, sitting in my library, looking polished and serene. Mark and Eliza stood just off camera, their faces glowing with a predatory triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mark began, his voice projecting a fake humility. "Our father, Arthur Sterling, has a brief statement regarding the future of the company." I watched as the AI version of my face moved. "Thank you, Mark," the clone said. The voice was perfect, my exact pitch, my warm resonance. "After many years of service, I have decided to entrust everything to my children. They represent the future." A murmur of approval went through the digital room. I could see Eliza smiling, her eyes already counting the zeros in her bank account. She leaned in, whispering just loud enough for the microphone to catch. "We love you, Dad. This is for the best." It was nauseating. They were using my own image to lie to the world and rob me in broad daylight. The chairman of the board cleared his throat. "Arthur, we need your verbal confirmation for the record. Do you authorize the immediate transfer of all intellectual property and voting rights to Mark and Eliza Sterling? And do you confirm that you are making this decision of your own free will, without any outside influence?" This was it. Mark looked at the screen, his thumb hovering over the confirm button on his tablet. "Go ahead, Dad," he urged, his voice trembling with greed. I saw him glance at Eliza, and they shared a look of pure, cold victory. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was a broken tool, a relic of a dead era. I took a deep breath, gripped my old analog faders, and prepared to flip the script. The AI opened its mouth to say yes, but instead of the scripted answer, a low, subsonic hum began to vibrate through the entire house. The trap was set, and the digital ghost was about to tell the truth. The AI's mouth opened, but the words that came out weren't mine. Instead, the speakers crackled with a chilling, familiar voice. It was my late wife, their mother. She whispered, her voice reconstructed from my private archives. The investors froze. Mark's face went pale, his hand hovering over the tablet as he frantically tapped the screen to kill the feed. He shouted, but I had already locked him out. Suddenly, the AI Arthur on the screen began to flicker, replaced by raw audio recordings I had captured over the last 3 days. The entire board of directors heard Mark's voice from the kitchen. Then came Eliza's laughter. The silence on the call was deafening. The prestigious investors watched in horror as my children's own voices convicted them of fraud and elder abuse in real time. Eliza screamed, grabbing the computer, but the AI, triggered by my subsonic codes, began its final command. The voice boomed, now shifting back to my own powerful booming bass. I kicked open the basement door and walked into the office. The look of pure, primal terror on their faces was worth every second of my life's work. They looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen, where the AI was now displaying the self-destruct sequence for every digital contract they had forged. The chairman of the board spoke up, his voice cold as ice. "Mark, Eliza, the authorities are on their way. This entire conference has been recorded as evidence of grand larceny and identity theft." In one move, I had used their future to drag their crimes into the light of the present. They had tried to turn me into a puppet, but they forgot that I was the one who knew how to pull the strings. Their digital empire crumbled into a heap of corrupted code, leaving them with nothing but the echoes of their own greed. After the police led Mark and Eliza away, the house fell into a silence I hadn't known in years. They didn't just lose the money. They lost the rights to the very technology they tried to weaponize against me. Because the AI was built on my unique vocal signature, a court ruled that any output it produced belonged solely to me. I took that digital clone and stripped it of its greed. Now, I use it for something better. I've started a foundation that helps elderly creators protect their intellectual property from digital theft. And I even use the AI version of my voice to narrate audiobooks for children in hospitals when I'm too tired to be in the booth. Life at 69 isn't an ending. It's a remastering. I've spent my recovery traveling, seeing the world I only used to talk about in documentaries. My children tried to turn me into a ghost, but all they did was remind me that a human soul has a resonance no algorithm can truly replicate. I am more than just a frequency. I am a man with a story that is still being written. I'm happy, I'm free, and for the first time in a long time, the only voice I have to listen to is my own. Looking back at the look of terror on their faces when the truth came out, a part of me feels a sting of sadness. They were my children, after all. But they chose a digital lie over a biological father. Did I go too far by exposing them so publicly? Or was this the only way to ensure they could never hurt anyone else? What would you have done if your own flesh and blood tried to replace you with a machine? If you found this story powerful, don't forget to hit the like button and leave a comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one of them. And if you want to hear more stories of justice and incredible twists, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. The end. Thank you for listening.